Hart, you've got to be terribly frustrated. Extremely frustrated over what has just happened.
Frustrated isn't the goddamn word for it! This is bullshit!
These videos are not for children. If you are a children, then piss off.
I hate this channel.
Hey there, I'm Social Justice Warrior V Infuso, and today I'm going to share a very funny story about the time that I met Bret Hart. Now, I want to make this clear that this isn't a story to demonize anybody. This isn't a story to get people angry or like, you know, run somebody's name through the mud. This is just a funny story of something that happened to me. This was my experience, and all these years later, I look back on it and laugh. Granted, at the time I didn't so much, but, you know, time heals all wounds. So growing up, I was always a wrestling fan. I started very, very young. My parents tried to discourage me because my father, this isn't a real sport, and my mother thought, oh, if he watches people do these things, he's going to do them himself. And you know what? She wasn't that far off, because every time my friends came over, I did jump off things and attack them. Granted, I was just a very violent kid, so maybe I would have done that anyway. Maybe I was just... No, I'm kidding. I wasn't. My friends were also wrestling fans, so they were into it. It's fine. It's fine. It's not big. It's fine. Anyway, I started very, very young. I was always a big wrestling fan, and my two favorite wrestlers of all time when I was a kid was Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. Now, I want to remind you, I got into wrestling a little bit before I hit kindergarten. So, like, around this time, the NWO was already around. Bret Hart was already in WCW. Shawn Michaels, I think, might have been on a hiatus from wrestling. Maybe he was even retired at the time. But, like, I had all the old VHS tapes from, like, because Blockbuster was a thing. We bought the VHS tapes, so I got to see a lot more Shawn Michaels back then. Anyway, point is... Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were my two favorites. Probably Shawn because he was this scrawny dude with long hair who was like taking on guys 2 or 3 times his size, and to me as a kid that was awesome. And I was a scrawny kid with long hair, how times have changed, who was incapable of doing that. So seeing him do it was just really awesome for me. And Bret Hart, probably just because it was Bret Hart. I just liked Bret Hart. Well, as much as my parents did discourage me from wrestling initially, they eventually relented and said, oh, you know what, he really likes this. My mother, who did spoil me for a good couple years when I was a kid, decided to jackass me around and take me to meet every wrestler that there was ever a signing for, locally or a little bit, out of the area. And it started in kindergarten when King Kong Bundy was doing a signing a few blocks away from my house at a post office. Well, outside a post office. I can't tell you why he did that, but he did. I remember it being a little bit too windy that day. Anyway, so here's this big dude, King Kong Bundy, in a Hawaiian shirt. I shit you not. And I recognize him. But, like, again, I'd only just got into wrestling. I was really big into it. And King Kong Bundy was a little bit before my time. Now, I definitely recognized him. I saw him. I've seen this guy somewhere. I can't figure out where or what. And now, all these years later, I'm thinking it was actually probably because I owned the older WrestleManias on VHS, and he took on Taker at one year. I think that was where I remembered him from. But he was selling these pictures. And first off, he was a really nice guy. One of the sweetest guys I ever met. And he was selling these pictures of him stepping on Hulk Hogan. So, upon me seeing this, when you're a kid, you have a thought, it immediately comes out of your mouth. I immediately said, oh, I know Hulk Hogan. Meaning, I know Hulk Hogan because I know of Hulk Hogan. I've seen him on TV. Not that I personally know him. And King Kong Bundy looked at me and he smiled and he goes, oh, yeah? I beat up Hulk Hogan. And he was a really nice guy. He signed the Polaroid. I sat on his lap. He signed the picture. He was a very sweet guy. Which, by the way, I really hope that somebody has picked up his cats from the shelter at this point in time of me making this. So for the next year or two, and depending on who you ask, if you ask me, it was the next year. If you ask my mother, it was the same year. So, but for the next year, I just met all different kinds of wrestlers. I met Bam Bam Bigelow, who put me in a headlock and made me feel like I escaped a headlock from him. Really sweet dude. Probably the nicest wrestler I ever met. Billy Gunn was actually really cool when I was younger. The Headbangers were as immature as they were on camera. I don't know if they were just working in gimmick or maybe the gimmick was working them. And Kane notably did not say much because he didn't speak on camera at the time. So he just kind of threw a mask and a red t-shirt. Well, his hair was like basically in a man bun. Very strange time. Anyway, I met a lot of wrestlers, right? And the thing is that when I was younger, I always wanted these people to like me because, you know, I was young and I think I kind of idolized them on some level or another. So every time I was online for a wrestler, I was trying to think, what can I say to make them, to make them like me, to have like a good interaction with them or whatever. And it came time to meet Bret Hart. And I was very nervous about this because Bret Hart was like I said, him and Shawn Michaels, my all-time favorite wrestlers. Fun story, I knew Bret Hart from his time in WCW. I think I might have seen him in a couple of my old VHS tapes at the time, like some of his matches in WWF, but I knew him from WCW. I knew Shawn Michaels from WWF. I didn't even know that they had any kind of interaction whatsoever. Like, I did not know anything about that. And that's going to come into play in a second. So I'm standing online, and the line keeps growing shorter and shorter as I'm in my own head thinking, what can I say to get Bret the Hitman Hart to smile? And I think we all know that's not exactly an easy task. So anyway, I approach him. In my head, I had two thoughts. I had one, I could say I know Owen Hart, because Owen Hart, I didn't know they were brothers either. I just knew that he's Bret Hart and he's Owen Hart, so maybe they know each other. Hart, right? Maybe they're related on some level. Didn't know that they were brothers. And then I thought, I could tell him I know Shawn Michaels, who is the Heartbreak Kid. And I think as I got closer, I decided on Owen, because they both have the same last name. And for whatever reason, when I finally got up there to meet him, Shawn Michaels is what came out of my mouth. And this was after he had signed, I think he signed a little action figure I had of him. And then I took a picture with him, and immediately after, I said, I know Shawn Michaels. And I have never in my life seen a man smile, completely dissipate, just completely be demolished with a few words. Never in my life have I seen that before. Have I experienced that? And Shawn could talk about how he lost his smile all he want. I was there publicly to see Bret Hart lose his. And he took a minute, and he thought to himself, and then he looked back at me, and he goes, oh yeah? Well, the next time you see him, give him one of these. And Bret Hart, I shit you not, flipped me off. He gave me the middle finger. I mean, granted, he was telling me, give that to Shawn Michaels the next time I see him. But that just completely crushed me as a child. That I made my own idol flip me off as a kid. Because I told him I knew Shawn Michaels. Again, had no idea whatsoever about, what was going on with the two of them, that they had their issues. My mind put them together because he's the Heartbreak Kid, and Bret Hart is Bret Hart. Heartbreak. And heartbreak is a really good word to describe that moment. It was a really, really, really terrible moment. And that's how Bret the Hitman Hart went from being my favorite wrestler to being my least favorite wrestler. I started actively booing him, even when he was a face, whether he was a heel, whatever the hell. And I was no longer a Bret Hart fan. when he had to retire, I think like a year later, a year or two later, whatever it was, I was like, good. And all these years later, of course, now I know like the rivalry, the real life rivalry, the heat, the anger between the two of them was there. And he was at a really, really dark place in his life. He just got screwed over by his employers, his coworkers, probably some of his friends. And, just completely, it turned him into a jaded, cynical asshole. And as a jaded, cynical asshole myself, I totally understand it. I don't think I'd exactly flip a child off, but, I get where that was coming from. I accidentally seemed to pour salt in his wound. But let me tell you the worst part of this story. The worst part of this all is that when I was younger, I would tell people this story. And no one would believe me. And let me tell you why. The internet wasn't the way it is today. There wasn't this kind of information out there about who wrestlers were in their real lives. Shoot interviews existed, obviously, but they were harder to find. They really weren't, like, open access for the public, like, you know what I mean? Like, now you get to go on YouTube, type in so-and-so shoot interview, you could probably find a 2-hour one, sit down, watch it, you know what I mean? But that wasn't how it was. You'd have to go out there, you'd have to be a real smart fan, quote-unquote, a real smart. You had to go and buy the DVDs and all that. And there wasn't that available access to learn who these people were, right? So when I would tell people that Bret Hart flipped me off, you have to remember, it wasn't until, and this wasn't even all that long ago, but it wasn't until like 2009, 2010-ish, around there, that people started realizing that Bret Hart was a miserable old fuck. Like, that was around the time when Bret started rating people's matches. Oh, I watched the match, it was a 4 out of 10. He started being very critical of every wrestler who ever entered a wrestling ring. He made comments on people like Ric Flair, some of the biggest names in the industry, and everyone was just like, oh, he's really bitter. He's a sourpuss. This guy's miserable. Just miserable. Miserable. Absolutely just miserable. There wasn't that information when I was a kid. So growing up, going through all of elementary school and middle school, when I would tell people this, they'd be like, Bret Hart wouldn't do that. Bret's not like that at all. Bret loves his fans. Bret's a great guy. Bret's great with kids because, like, their knowledge of Bret Hart was the character they saw on TV. There was the guy who was putting on classic after classic, and then, he went out and he's, hugging Santa Claus, or you scream down a hallway, Bret! And he gives you his fucking glasses, That was people's image of Bret Hart. That's what people remembered. That's how people knew Bret Hart when I was younger. So no matter how many times I'd explain to them that, I'm telling you, this dude flipped me off and told me to give it to Shawn Michaels, they were like, no, Bret wouldn't do that. You're either making this up or maybe you're confused. I was like, I'm confused. What am I confused about? And like, well, maybe you confused Bret with one of the other Hart Foundation members. Oh, I bet it was Jim. It was probably Jim Neidhart who did that. Jim. And it's like, no, I know wrestlers. I've been watching wrestling my whole life. I know who Bret Hart is. Bret Hart gave me the bird. And they're like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think he would do that. Bret's not like that at all. Bret's a good guy. Everyone loves Bret. Bret loves everyone. Bret wouldn't do this. So that was my favorite part of that. So I always had to go through that, where people were like, oh, you must be confused, or maybe it was somebody else from the Hart Foundation or the Hart family. Like, maybe it was Bruce. Maybe Bruce Hart gave you the bird. We can imagine Bruce. No one knew who Bruce was. But yeah, so that is my story of how my childhood hero flipped me off. And that's why every now and again I'll throw a little shade in his direction. Of course, now that I'm older, it's a joke. It's funny. But I did hate him for a good portion of my life. And my mother wasn't so fond of paying good money to have this dude flip me off. So much so that when he got attacked at the Hall of Fame ceremony and it started circulating on news outlets and stuff, she sent me the article, and then she wrote, good, payback's a bitch. So yeah, that's the story. That is the story of how Bret Hart flipped me off as a child.
Wait, there's more!
I'm not recording you, I'm just getting audio. What did Bret say to me when I was younger? Go ahead.
No. I don't want to.
I want to say I'm not getting.
You said, "Hey, Bret the Hitman Hart, I know Shawn Michaels."
I did.
And he said, "Yeah, next time you see him, give him one of these."
And then he flipped me off.
And he flipped you off.
Flipped me off.
And I was fucking mad because.
And then you told Dad, and then he was like, Dad looked like he wanted to fight him.
I was like, "Who
Dad's gonna fight
the bird to a fucking 5-year-old?"
Oh, good times.
No, it's not good times. You were in kindergarten. That was disgusting.
Yeah, you were really pissed off the rest of the night.
I was really very pissed
okay.
off because who talks to a child like that?
Where was this? Because
it was in Jersey. It was.
I thought it was in Jersey.
It was in like.
But it was a show, right? It was like a show, and he was doing a signing there.
It was just a signing. It was kind of like.
It was like a bunch of people.
WrestlerCon before like
the Comic-Con type
right.
thing.
It was like a miniature one of those, and there was a bunch of old time guys there. They used to do it too, a couple of times. Down at the in New York, they used to have like this, look like a bubble, and they have wrestling shows in there. And before that,
yeah. Okay.
So.
But I just to reconfirm, I'm not making the Bret Hart story up. He really did flip off a 5-year-old.
He really did flip off a 5-year-old, and I was fucking.
Didn't you tell me that you talked to the guy who ran that show?
I did. I talked to him, and the guy he apologized. He couldn't believe it. I was like, what kind of asshole does this? Because I went to all those wrestling shows. This one happened to be, I think it was in Woodbridge, or it was right over the Outer Bridge, and it was like at some kind of. Maybe a VFW hall or something like that, but it was back in '97 and '98. You were little.
So, that's literally what I remember. What I remember from it was that it was not on the island, but it wasn't far from the island. I thought it was like Jersey, and I thought it was either '97, '98. Yep. This was like when I was first getting into wrestling.
Yes, you were either.
And my two favorite wrestlers at the time were Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart.
You were in kindergarten.
I think I might have been in first grade.
But the thing was, is that
I was young.
You were young. Yeah. I really think you were only in kindergarten. Because,
but it's funny because out of all the things I could have said to him, that was probably the only thing that would have made him.
But I don't know where it came out of that. Like.
Oh, I do.
But
because he's Bret Hart, and Shawn Michaels was called the Heartbreak Kid. Oh. So that's what my innocent kindergarten mind correlated the two.
Well,
I was either going to tell him, I know Shawn Michaels, meaning I see him on TV, or I know Owen Hart. Now, I probably should have went with the second one because that was his brother who he loved dearly, and the other was somebody he despised with every bone in his body.
Well, when you met King Kong Bundy, you told him that you knew.
I knew Hulk Hogan. That's right. Yeah.
And I'm like, no, you don't. And you go, yeah, I beat up Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, he was nice.
But that was the normal way that you talk to a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you were in first grade because
Bundy was kindergarten. Yeah. And and remember, he even showed me the picture of him stepping on Hulk Hogan. He's like, see, I beat up Hulk Hogan.
And I would pay for a Polaroid for you and the guy, and they would sign that. And I would pay for you to have
an action figure signed or whatever too.
Action figure, and that's
Bret Hart signed his own ass.
Yeah,
Bret Hart.
He did. He signed his.
And you were like, that's so weird. Like of all the places you could have signed your name,
like
why did you sign your
ass? Down the leg or something, you know, or across the chest.
No, Bret wanted to know what kind of person he was.
Yeah.
An ass.
That made me angry. It really did. Because I mean, the two guys that ran that, because we used to go out to.
They were familiar with you because you brought me to stuff before, right?
They would tell me. They would call me all the time and say, oh, we're having this and this. Because I took you to the place, and you were also you stood out because you had that curly blonde hair.
Yeah.
And you talked to everybody. You talked to those guys all the time. They thought that you were adorable.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. You're watching the Social Injustice Warrior V Infuso's channel, dude. So if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too want to become a V-tard, don't forget to like and subscribe, and click that little bell icon to get updates and notifications. Ooh, tell him what up, Mach. Ooh, yeah. follow the man on Twitter, yeah, because we all know it's not stalking if it's on the internet, yeah. Join the madness by joining the Discord, and if you have a moment of time and a free dollar to spare, head over to the SIJW's Patreon, dig it, where you can request videos, get exclusive videos, and early access to content, yeah. Or go down to PayPal, where you can buy the shirts, brother. But most importantly, just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.